Good evening and welcome to Thursday's edition of the Regional News. Cuba on Wednesday began releasing prisoners jailed following anti-government protests in 2021, making good on a deal agreed with the Biden administration this week. Outgoing U.S. President Joe Biden on Tuesday removed Cuba from a blacklist of nations that sponsors terrorism and rolled back a raft of sanctions implemented by Donald Trump during his first presidency that have contributed to the island's worst economic crisis in decades. Hours after the U.S. announcement, Cuba President Miguel Diaz-Canel said Cuba would gradually release 553 prisoners from its jails following talks with the Vatican. In the July 2021 protests, the biggest since Fidel Castro's 1959 revolution, thousands took to the streets in towns and cities across the island, many protesting shortages of food, medicine, and electricity as COVID-19 cases soared. Rights groups say at least 1,000 people were arrested after the demonstrations. Cuba said those jailed committed crimes ranging from arson to vandalism and sedition. Retired Justice Seymour Panton, the chairman of the Integrity Commission, IC, has scolded Justice Minister Delroy Chuck for advising his parliamentary colleagues not to comply with a critical provision in the IC Act that requires them to furnish information about their spouse's earnings to the anti-corruption body. In a sharp rebuke of the senior government minister and the lawmaker yesterday, Panton said for Chuck to advise his colleagues to break the law, quote-unquote, may well be itself an offense. The IC chairman reminded the country that the IC Act, which was passed by parliamentarians including the Justice Minister, provides for certain declarations to be made by parliamentarians and public officers. He said, a failure to do so carries penalties of fines or imprisonment. Section 39 of the IC Act states that, quote-unquote, subject to the provisions of the Act, every person who, on or after the appointment day, is a parliamentarian or public official, shall submit to the Director of Information and Complaints a statutory declaration of its assets and liabilities and its income in the form set out in the third schedule. Israel and Hamas have agreed a Gaza ceasefire and hostage release deal following 15 months of war, mediators Qatar and the USA. Qatari Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani said the agreement would come into effect on Sunday, so long as it was approved by the Israeli cabinet. U.S. President Joe Biden said it would halt the fighting in Gaza, surge much-needed humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian civilians, and reunite the hostages with their families. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the deal's final details were still being worked on, but he thanked the Biden administration for promoting it. Many Palestinians and Israeli hostages' families celebrated the news, but there was no let-up in the war on the ground in Gaza. The Hamas-run Civil Defense Agency reported Israeli airstrike killed more than 20 people following the Qatari announcement. They included 12 people who were living in a residential block in the Sheikh Radwan neighborhood of Gaza City, it said. There was no immediate command from the Israeli military. More than 46,700 people have been killed in Gaza since then. Most of the 2.3 million population has also been displaced. There is widespread destruction, and there are severe shortages of food, fuel, medicine, and shelter due to a struggle to get aid to those in need. Thank you for watching. I am TIANA.